My name's Amelia Thorn, and I'm here to hopefully convince you to buy my book. The Dawn Thief, which you are currently seeing a screen of, is my passion project that I wrote entirely in quarantine, because unlike some, I decided to use my time productively rather than doing a round trip of 260 miles. We're looking at you, Mr. Cummings. Anyway, so I hope you enjoy it. This will be the first chapter, or at least as much as I can fit into 15 minutes, that screencast allows, and I'll get right into it. No, you cannot see my face, mostly because I would quite like to keep what remains of my ego, and even if I had a screen recording of my face, it would mostly just be approximately 87 chins. If you want to see my lovely face, you can't see what I just did, but I did put quotation marks around that word lovely. You can go at my Twitter handle, which is under the cover, and just see how beautiful I am. I am kidding. Anyway, moving on. Chapter 1. Morning broke under an insulting disguise, the greying clouds stole much of the morning light before its rays reached sodden ground, with little distinction between it and the weary hours before. Birds now chirped with praise for new-found morning, or perhaps rather in distaste of the weather it brought with it, and the streets burst to life with the sleep-deprived. And finally, the toll of the bell. At a distance it was a pleasant chime, but those unfortunate enough to be in a close proximity, the sound rattled bones and roused the dead. No church stood for 7 miles, so the sound wasn't burdened with the purpose of explaining the hour, nor calling the faithful to service. For the unknowing, the young, and occasionally the willingly naive, the sound served a fairly tedious purpose. A warning that the night's accumulated criminals had served their sentence. Most were willing to think that the only purpose, ignoring the truth lingering in the shadows of their home. But the bell took residence in an unkind part of town, capable of being kindly described as a pigsty. A small stone building with a smell that curdled milk and walls that writhed with fleas. That was the habitat of the despairing, the disorderly, and the drunken. The chiming bell to rouse the guards to free the prisoners, left fleeing with promises of a path set straight. Whilst that was fine enough purpose, a far better and infinitely more efficient option than posting a man at the door so you spend 10 minutes yelling, "Run for your lives," on the off chance someone's straight path took an unexpected bend. There was a second purpose to the rattling bell, so hated for its regular theft of a sleep-in. As a small town of Cresvy was resident the evil incarnate. For in that little borough, monsters didn't hide under bed, nor creep in the shadows. Rather, the town's primary source of nightmares, outside of a criminal lack of hygiene, took the form of a man not yet above 25, the epitome of a wolf in sheep's clothing. His curse was beyond dashing good looks and the occasional case of butterfingers. Lycanthropy had been thrust upon him from a young age. The experiences that followed had rendered said descriptor a rather inaccurate one. Said evil incarnate currently dozed peacefully propped against a cold stone wall, dreaming of playing with his niece and nephews, devouring his favourite meal, and being just about anywhere else but that cramped, dirty cell. Given the cell was a regular habitat by now, the term was little more bother than the howling winds. Rather, what roused evil incarnate that morning was the departure of warmth from his needs. Blinking pale blue eyes apart to spot his night's companion, a fluffy cat dubbed as Whiskey, departing through the bars of the cell. After all, evil incarnate was a friend to all forms of non-delicious wildlife, largely because he half-counted himself amid them. The young man stretched as best as his restraints permitted, found his feet at risk of removing the teeth of a nearby dozer. Someone seemingly either hadn't heard the warnings, didn't believe the warnings, but elected to risk his luck at the chance of a decent night's sleep. Either they hadn't noticed the chains restraining his every limb, or they believed an adequate method of restraint for evil incarnate. The young man was increasingly sure he could spread rumours his hair's super strength, and they would find a way to bind that in silver too. Silver, among rarer materials, offered something in the way of a weakness to the murderous 6-foot-tall pile of vile seething hate that had been sewn into his very clothes. Whilst frustrating, he considered it a reasonable compromise in return for having a roof over his head rather than the woods surrounding the little town, particularly during times where everything seemed to be plagued by the damned weather. It was not a one-way deal either, as being placed face to face with the jaws of death was something in the way of an incentive to stay on the other side of the cell's silver bars. But whether he was an effective deterrent became under some debate, as it never felt like the population of their rotting little cell ever decreased. At least it gave the young man some entertainment, and everyone did need a hobby. Chiming bells in practice should have been the signal of freedom, but in practicality it usually took about 10 minutes further. What was offered in excuse was that it provided a chance to evacuate the area. But more accurately, the guards were not morning people, or any time of the day people, really. But mornings seemed to bring out their crueler colours. Heavy footsteps accompanied by a thud drag pace caught his attention. A familiar sound, though most sounds were familiar by now, from the scuttle of the rats' feet to the dripping of leaking roofs. He wouldn't have gone far to associate the sound with a friend, but at least it wasn't an enemy, and given the present surroundings, he was willing to accept that as such a victory. This particular burly friend was something the wolf didn't know by name. A general rule of thumb meant those outside of these cell walls he was avoided. With these walls he wasn't worth the time of day. His eyes burned as the door flung open, light flooding the room like a bursting dam. The young wolf didn't move to wipe them, or rather he didn't move at all. A statue against the cold stone, only his eyes moved as he followed his dense trespasser. Beneath the stench of ale and poor bodily hygiene was nothing but the usual smell of damp. Occasionally, when income permitted, his mother would offer the guards a bribe to bring him breakfast. Part of him pondered if she always did, but the result was more dependent on the guards' willingness to comply. Today he smelled nothing. Around him cellmates scattered to the bars, trapped rats lunging for a suddenly opened barn door. Evil incarnate, on the other hand, took a more leisurely approach, lifting himself to his feet. The young man leant against the cold, damp wall, less in an attempt to seem relaxed and more in an attempt to reveal the pressure from his aching limbs. The chance to appear nonchalant happened to be a happy side effect. The rattling sound of greasy fingers fumbling with the metallic keys as he casually searched for the correct implement of freedom, either unaware or uncaring of the desperation of his wards to get the hell out of there. After a moment he found success, and the mighty door was shoved open. The guard entered in silence. Most of Cresvy still regarded the wolf fearfully even after all these years, in spite of the evidence that in his chained state he was about as threatening as the average lamb. And the guard's deviation from the norm left him respectful of daring. Most of the guards he had come across found themselves somewhere between hatred and boredom in regard to him. This one bordered somewhere in the middle, a happy medium as far as he was concerned. His knight's companions didn't take their chances at the guard changing his mind, hurtling out without a goodbye, leaving Silas and his sole comrades in the dust in the effort to be free of the cell walls. "Morning," the wolf offered as a way of greeting. His line of sight remained at the guard's muddied boots, and didn't lift when he continued into the cell. Whilst evil incarnate was yet to see someone utilize any of its various weapons, he didn't doubt that he wouldn't should the need arise. Electing not to dignify the wolf's greeting with a response, the guard knelt, yanking the wolf's wrist upright and unlocking the chains with a swift movement. Now he was somewhat more elegant, a striking snake rather than an ungainly tortoise. "Thanks," he said, standing fully now, stretching. His gaze followed as the guard departed at a hurried pace. The wolf was kind enough to allow him some distance, waiting a beat to try and work some warmth and feeling back into his aching legs before following suit. Within moments he found himself in the outside world once more, the terrain underfoot torn up and muddied, but it felt like freedom all the same. His eyes travelled across the street, nostrils flaring as he enjoyed what little in the way of fresh air Cresvy could offer. "You took your time, Silas." A voice sounded off to the right, but it didn't take him off guard. "Unfortunately, I don't think the guards are open for criticism at this time, and the last man to add to the suggestions box lost an arm." The wolf's response was easy and nonchalant as he turned to greet the speaker. "Do check back tomorrow, though. The guards are lovely fellows and always looking to improve their services," he said with crossed arms. Despite a stoic exterior, his friend's lips parted to release a soft chuckle. Careful, they might hear you and take you back. Her tone was that of a scolding mother. The condescending shake of her head sent red hair flying with the efforts of her overemphasis. In spite of his best efforts to look unperturbed, he found it difficult to contain his excitement at seeing his friend again. "What time did the cat drag you in this morning? It looks like you were hauled home by the ankles," he scoffed playfully. "You got in last night," she added, electing to ignore the last part of his question for his sake. "And you try looking beautiful when you showered by a shared bucket every day." Struggling to stifle the chuckle that threatened to tug free of his lips, he shook his head with amusement. He gave in to his attempts at restraint. Launching forward, he greeted his companion with a firm hug before she had the chance to reply, of misty flick. Pulling free of his embrace, "I'm glad. I've missed you too, Silas. Glad to see you were able to keep yourself in one piece whilst I've been gone." The wannabe pirates had been gone for the better part of a fortnight, travelling east with her father trading. He had leapt at the chance to be free of the town's rotten air and smoky streets. But Silas had missed her more than he imagined he would. His life wasn't littered with an overabundance of friends, and her departure, however short, had been a bitter shock to the system. It was an experience Silas would have given his left arm for, but had known better than to even try to ask if he might accompany. The seas were rough, and he doubted a captain would be willing to accept a wolf on board, even in the depths of a rum stupor. Despite himself, he couldn't help but begrudge his friend a little of the fact she'd been able to go without him. Even a little more, considering she hadn't even stopped to wonder what might happen to him whilst he was gone, gallivanting on the high sea whilst he was left here to rot. "I'm not so inept that I can't keep myself alive for a fortnight," he scoffed in what he considered a reasonable attempt at defence. "I beg to differ. Last time I left you alone for more than half an hour you came back with a new coat and sharp teeth." He grimaced at the poor attempt at a joke, the growl that took free of his chest, a playful one for the most part. "Don't make me regret saying I've missed you, or I'll find a ship and make sure you'll never come back." Flick seemed unaffected by the growl that would have sent most scattering for the hells. But after 6 years of friendship, Silas was of the increasing opinion of Bob would be incapable of surprising him. "You wouldn't know what to do without me, just admit it." "Perhaps. But anyway, you'd likely bug them too much they'd bring you back within the hour." "Well, I managed to remain at sea for 2 weeks without being shoved overboard. Maybe you're just overly sensitive, Si." Seemingly bored of the conversation, Flick's change of topic was as subtle as the average bull in a china shop. "Anything happened whilst I was gone?" But the burning gaze of excitement left Silas assuming there was some ulterior motive to her choice of subject. "Not that I'm aware of, unless there's been a murder overnight," Silas returned with a shrug. "Despite my requests, they don't bring newspapers to the cells." Content to leave her hanging, he continued at a lazy pace before adding with a gentle grin, "Why, what have you heard?" Grasping the chance before it could be snatched cruelly away once more. "Not from here." The words spilled from her like water cascading down the rocks, stopping in her tracks and spinning on the heel to face him once more. "Word is the king is set to return today." Halting on the spot to prevent smacking shoulder to shoulder, he set her with a gaze similar to how one might regard an overdramatic child. Not entirely unfair description for his best friend. Silas was unsure as to the source of her excitement. The king's departure from the lands had been well publicised, but its purpose was nothing overly exciting, nor reason to believe he might not come back. So he's been gone long enough. Even a king can't go on vacation forever, Flick. He's bound to come back at some point. Her head shook so violently he was rendered surprised it wasn't dislocated in the action. You miss my deep meaning, dumbass," she grumbled. "He's returning, and he's using the Little Dusk Walls as his port of call." Okay, so in fairness to me, I did manage to get through almost all of it, but I've only got 30 seconds left, otherwise I've got to upgrade. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope you enjoyed it, and feel free to check the book out if you feel ever so inclined. And do remember to subscribe to the Bookfinders Club YouTube account to see more of their content.